What is going on, guys? JV here with Code Fellowship, where purpose meets function, and welcome to another episode. Today, I have a special guest all the way from across the pond, all the way from Sweden, Dennis Palmer. He is a native-born American, so I did find that out. I was like, whoa, like he said Colorado and our conversation, and yeah, it comes up find out that he went around many areas of the United States, and you'll probably hear a little bit about that. But welcome, Dennis. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. Feel free to introduce yourself, where you're from, what do you do, and how does your faith intersect with your tech career?
Well, yeah, I was born in Seattle. My family is still in that area. But I moved away before all the tech companies really exploded in the Seattle area.
Mm,
But there's guys that I went to high school with that have been at Amazon for over 20 years. So,
wow.
yeah, there's some, it's an interesting place to be from. But I never really worked for any of the big companies out there. But my mom sent me several years ago a little essay. It's like three or four sentences that I wrote uh, in 1983 in school, and it was all about me. And I talked about in the future wanting to be a computer programmer. So actually, on the 40 years to the day of the date of that letter, I gave a lightning talk at the Codebeam Europe conference in Berlin last year, where the letter was like my intro to my talk. So I don't know, maybe we can throw a link to that one in the show notes
Yeah,
as
for
well.
sure.
But
Yeah.
kind of fun to like hit that marker of you've been writing code for over 40 years. So as you can imagine, it's changed a lot. The early programs I wrote were saved on a cassette tape. So
No
like just
way.
like a regular cassette recorder, and you'd plug it into the computer and hit enter and hit record on the tape, and it would record audio, an audio signal onto the tape, and that was how we saved programs back then. So
I
uh
did not know that. That's an awesome fact.
yeah, so that was early 80s. um and then into uh like into high school, well, junior high and high school, at my church, we had a program called Bible Quiz, and we would memorize books of the Bible and travel around and compete against other church teams. So like James and Romans and uh, Hebrews and First and Second Peter were the years that I memorized the most of it. But the also memorized parts of Matthew and John and Acts and First and Second Corinthians, like through the 6 years of junior high and high school. And through that time, actually started to feel called to missions. And so when I started college, I was going in as a foreign missions major. But those courses, I don't know, it just didn't gel with me. Like, just didn't fit. I don't really know what it was, but like studying that in school, just I don't know, it didn't work for me.
Mm.
So I took a year off, and then a friend of mine went to Evangel College at the time. It's Evangel University now in Springfield, Missouri. And he came back after his first year at school and said, "Dennis, you're coming back to Evangel with me, right?" I'm like, "No, I tried college. It wasn't for me. I'm done." He's like, "No, no, you have to come back." And so, uh, I mean, back then, I I don't even know if this was probably like 93, 94. So like university didn't have a website. So like we had a paper catalog that was like all the course,
Yes.
all the things you could study and the courses and stuff. And one of them was computer science. I was like, oh, I played around with some programming when I was a kid. Like I could try that out. No real intention that that was going to be a career. I had no idea really. Um, but got into it, and because I had been exposed at such an early age, a lot of the things in the computer science curriculum just came really easy to me. And fellow fellow students, classmates were really struggling with some things that I was finding just really easy. So it was one of those like, oh, I might be good at this. Like this might be something I should pursue and continue doing. Um, in the computer when I was 10 was a Texas Instruments TI 994A, and the way it did graphics was hexadecimal strings. So you would you could draw little sprites and move them around the screen. And so there was this chart of 0 through 9, A through F, and what pixels that would turn on and off in like these blocks of 4. And so like 0 would be they're all off, and F is they're all on. And it was it was binary. But as a kid, I had no idea I was learning binary to hex conversion. I just was drawing pictures. And so in college, when we got to that point where we were doing like binary to hex conversion, I'm like, oh, I can close my eyes and see this. Like that was easy. So it was just interesting how, kind of those seeds that were planted so early had already been growing, even though I hadn't really been thinking about that as something that I would pursue. But then after 2 years at Evangel, I went to work with a friend of mine and his wife. And this friend had been on the Bible quiz team with me. He was, I think, 2 or 3 years older than me. But like he taught me to drive, and like we'd had a lot of fun experiences as kids. But he had some computer program ideas that he wanted just for his business. And so I started working for him and didn't end up going back to school. I did 4 years of college, but since it was 2 years as foreign missions and 2 years as computer science, it wasn't enough credits to actually graduate yet. But he told me he'd make me an owner in his company. And I think originally it was supposed to be 50-50, and then it was him and his wife and me. So then it was 30%, and then we never had anything on paper. It was never official. So in the end, it basically meant that they got 5 years of free work out of me. But I learned a lot. I wrote a lot of code, and figured out a lot of things. But I don't want to dwell on this part of the story too much, because I don't feel like it defines me much anymore. But it definitely was something that I went through that I think it's helpful for people to hear. He was abusive. And I mean, it started out in the early years, he just was angry a lot and would yell at me. But over the course of 5 years, and I lived at their house, I slept on their couch. And I mean, if this had been successful, it'd be one of those amazing like startup stories. But we never really made much money. And that was part of why he was angry, because we weren't making money. But it, gradually got worse and worse, where he started hitting me and physically abusing me. And one of the ways that I've told this part of the story in the past is I feel like I'm probably one of the only men that knows what an abused wife goes through, because he would always apologize and, oh, I'm sorry, and things would get better, and like he knew how to motivate me with the vision of what we were working on and what we were doing. And we actually transitioned into creating Bible software. So this was the 90s, so it was Bible on CD-ROM. And our marketing thought was, at the time, the video game Diablo was the number one best-selling CD-ROM. And so we're like, why should the devil have the top-selling CD? Like, the Bible's the number one best-selling book. It should be outselling this devil game, which, I don't know, we ran with it anyway. So yeah, we were we were doing some cool things, but yeah, it just continued to get worse. And so actually tried to leave a couple different times, and I don't know, somehow he just had a way of painting a picture for me of like what we would do together. And when we were when we were on, we made a pretty good team because he had good creative ideas, and I was kind of making those ideas come to life. And one of the coolest projects we did was we put like a mini version of our Bible software on some music CDs. So there was an artist named Crystal Lewis, and her husband had a record label, and so we actually had a deal with them where we were putting a mini version of our Bible software on all of their music CDs that they were producing. So yeah, there was some really cool stuff that we were doing, but just the inside where nobody saw, it was not pleasant. And I finally got out of there and ended up going to Denver. When I left, so that was back in Seattle. So when I left, had no idea really where I was going. I wanted to be far enough away where he couldn't find me or he didn't know where I was. So I started hitchhiking, and I had no destination in mind, but I didn't feel like if someone was picking me up, I should say, I don't know where I'm going. So I just started saying Denver. No intention of actually living there. But there was a guy who picked me up in the middle of Oregon, and he said, "Oh, I know somebody at the Salvation Army that'll buy you a bus ticket to Denver." So he took me into their to the Salvation Army office, and they gave me a voucher. So when I lived in Denver, people always asked me, "What brought you to Denver?" And I would say, "A Greyhound bus." And they would kind of look like, "Wait, what?" So made for a fun story. But got involved with a church there and a home group, and it was one of those times where I think it would have been very easy to turn away from God, but just I don't know, I needed to be in church, and I grew up in church. My parents are Christians, and my grandparents as well, and so yeah, I don't know, there was just something about it that going to a new place and finding a church is just, I don't know, just kind of was deep enough in me that's what I did. So
that's great to hear.
Yeah, and then got a job with just a regular software company. Actually, when I first started looking for a job in Denver, I didn't want to do programming because I thought that I would have to put references on a resume, and they would try to call these people that I had been working with. I'd be like, "Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to have the conversation about, I don't want them to know where I am," because that would have been awkward. So I actually went to one job interview that was it was listed as a cabinet maker. They were actually doing like these specialized like heated cabinets or like heated cages for like vet clinics. So yeah, it was interesting, but through that interview, I was like, "Yeah, no, I can't do this." So then, actually wrote up a resume, and I had been doing a lot of different things since I was the only technologist at this company that we were trying to create. So then this was the end of 2000, and the .com crash hadn't happened yet. So there were companies all over the United States that were, I had recruiters calling me from all over. There was a resort company in Boca Raton, Florida, and they like had a resort management software that they had written for themselves, and they were getting ready to expand and try to start marketing that out to other resorts, and they were ready to fly me out for an interview from Dallas. But Florida was too far from where my family was, and so I didn't really want to go that far. And by that time I had made some friends and felt like I wanted to stay in Denver. So yeah, I didn't end up taking that one, but I got a job with they were doing software for the high-end interior design industry. They'd been a profitable company for like 17 or 18 years, but they started burning investment capital trying to do something like some web catalog or something, and they were spending way too much money on the images and the design for this catalog, and then they ended up going out of business. but I was there for 13 months. And at that time, well, the Bible software and also that job, I was using a programming language called Delphi, which
Never
I
heard of it.
I haven't heard much of it recently, but it was based on Pascal, so it was
Okay,
kind of like
I've heard
Object
of that.
Pascal, but they gave it a new name. And it had a good IDE and like visual components, so like building Windows applications. It was it was a competitor to Visual Basic at the time.
Mm.
But it was more strongly typed. And actually, the guy who created Delphi ended up going to Microsoft and creating C Sharp.
Oh,
Uh,
no way.
and yeah, Anders Halsberg. He
Yeah.
he yeah he created Delphi. Um, and then later
Now that sounds
was
familiar because I just saw
yeah
it back in rain not so long ago.
was involved in creating TypeScript. So it is just funny that I've worked on like three different languages that this one guy was involved in
Hmm.
creating. Uh, but yeah, so then it was spring of well, I was there for 13 months, so it would have been like the spring of uh 2002. So, just 13 months later, the job market had just completely dried up. Like there was nothing. It took a while to find a job. But I actually ended up working or finding a job at Youth for Christ USA at their national office. And they'd been working with some contractors, but I was the first programmer that they hired full time. So I did some event registration systems for them, and they had a mission team or like a mission department. So they had world outreach and they were sending missionaries around the world. And so one of the apps that I wrote was a web page for their missionaries to go online and like view what donations had come into their account.
Oh.
So then I don't remember the exact timeline, and I'm trying to do a quick version of this story, but uh, so then one day leaving the office at Youth for Christ, so they owned the building. It was this 3-story building just outside of Denver, near the Centennial Airport. Um, and this young lady and her mom got on the elevator uh, as I was leaving, and it was at the time where I was really trying to be like more outgoing and like talking to people. And so, here was someone who I didn't recognize. Got on the elevator. I was like, "Hi, I'm Dennis. Who are you?" And they're as you might think, they were like, "Why is this guy talking to us on the elevator?" But I don't know, made an impression. Um, but then a month or two later, after church, we went out to eat with all of like the young adults. After the service, would go out to a restaurant or something. So uh, we met again, and we're just talking, and I was, "Hi, I'm Dennis. Who are you?" And she's, "Oh, I'm Destiny, and I work at Youth for Christ." I'm like, "Really? I do too. What do you do there?" And she goes, "You're the guy from the elevator." Uh,
That's funny.
and yeah, so she was coming on staff at Youth for Christ to be one of their missionaries. So she had already been using that system that I wrote for like checking donations. When we met again, you know, yeah, we met for the second time. But then we were friends for about 5 years, and before I really realized how special she was. But then we got married in 2007, and uh, yeah, I just jumped a whole bunch of the story. But by that time, we had moved to California. Um, and she'd also been, well, after we met, before we got married, she lived in Israel for 2 years. She was volunteering with a organization over there. Um, and so yeah, then we were in Southern California, got married, had a baby, and then oh well, so at Youth for Christ, we started doing PHP for web programming, and actually that's also where I discovered .NET and C Sharp in like 2005,
Oh, okay.
and so started using that. But then moved to California, got a job at a small software company there, And yeah, and then 2009 was another, like, the economy crashed again. It was the, like, real estate crash. Um and the company I worked for was only like 12 or 13 people. So instead of doing any layoffs, they just did an across the board pay cut. And so we were actually renting a house from the owner of the company at that time. So I had to go into his office and say, "Hey, I can't afford your house anymore. We need to move." And he said, "Oh, where are you thinking about going?" And I said, "Well, my wife's family is in Texas. So yeah, we're kind of thinking about that." And so he let me work from home or work remotely for 2 years.
Wow. Working from
From
home in that time period.
Yeah, so yeah,
What
that
time?
was 2009. And yeah, I worked remotely for that company for 2 years. But that was tricky because I was the only remote person. And so, like, a
Mm,
lot of times they'd have a meeting in the office and, not start Zoom or whatever it was we were using for video conferencing back then. So
probably
it was
Skype.
easy to, it was easy to miss out on, like, what was actually happening. Uh, but yeah, I moved to Texas and, sorry, hang on.
You get
Uh, and actually, one of the jobs I had in Texas was for Right Now Media. They
I've heard
actually
of them.
do, yeah, they do. They basically created Netflix for the church.
Basically,
Um, they
yes.
they, they were doing. I don't know if they still have training, but they created it. It started as an online training platform. So, like, churches that are training their volunteer leaders. Um,
They still do. Yeah.
okay, okay,
There's a lot more categories, and there's some
yeah.
for like entrepreneurship
But
and
the
stuff like
the
that.
videos, like, before the videos, it was online training. So
Mm,
they were, a pastor at a church could create a custom training and have all of their volunteers go through it kind of at their
I
own
see.
pace. And so it was quiz questions and training material. The video part really took off. Um, and yeah, it became what it is today. But yeah, I was there in the kind of as they were transitioning into more and more of doing the, like, online video streaming platform. Um, and yeah, so I've gone back and forth between, like, working for a ministry or, doing, like, the Bible software and just having, like, regular programming jobs. Uh, but yeah, somewhere along the line in Texas, I had discovered functional programming, um, and heard about a user group in Nashville called Nashville Functional Programmers, and it sounded like a really cool meetup, but we didn't have one in Dallas, so
Mm.
I posted on Twitter, like, "Hey, is there a group like this in the Dallas area?" And a whole bunch of people replied and said, "No, but you should start one." So I did that. I started the Dallas Functional Programmers user group. And we talked about languages like F sharp and Clojure and uh, Erlang a little bit. Um, and actually, through that, discovered the language Elixir, which it's. Are you familiar with
I've heard of
Elixir?
Elixir. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard of Elixir and some of the frameworks around it and stuff like
yeah.
that.
So
Does
it
Erlang
run.
originates from that too?
Yeah. So Erlang was created in the 80s, and it's been open source, I think, since the late 90s. But Elixir runs on the same virtual machine as Erlang, so
Mm, I
they
see.
both compile down to the same bytecode. Um, and so you've got the, like, the fault tolerance and concurrency and distributed systems, that Erlang has, but a nicer syntax with better dev tooling.
Right,
But
more
Elixir quickly
modern
became
flavor.
Yeah, Elixir quickly became my favorite programming language. But it was kind of a challenge to make the jump between, working in .NET, or I was actually doing a lot of front end development as well. So taking a pretty significant pay cut just to work with a different programming language never really justifiable. Uh, but then in 2019, so uh, the connection to Sweden was that back in 2000 and 2001, my wife attended a Bible school here. There's a church called Livets Ord, which translates to Word of Life, here in Uppsala, Sweden. And she came to their Bible school, and they've got an international class that they do in English,
Mm.
as well as the Swedish class. And the way it's set up is that they do like a 1 year program that just kind of stands on its own. You get a certificate after the 1 year. And then they've got a second year that some people continue on that has like more of a missions focus. But she had done that 1 year Bible school before we met. And she always told me about it, and it sounded really cool and something that like I wanted to, we dreamed about me attending the same Bible school. So in 2019, it worked out for me to work remotely again for the company that I was working with. So we packed up and came to Sweden. But along the way, the company said I could only do it for 6 months. Like initially, my
Oh,
boss and my boss's boss said, "Oh yeah, it's no problem. We've done that before. It'll be fine." But the HR got involved and legal got involved, and they said, "No, you can only do that for 6 months," because they didn't want to mess with the like Swedish tax laws and tax
right.
system and labor laws, which makes sense. Uh, so that 6 months ended at the end of February 2020.
That was like basically when COVID was
Right.
still seeping through the world.
Right. And so like the next month, March of 2020 is when everything shut down.
Mm.
So it felt like the worst possible timing. Just like, oh, what are we going to do? And I had a little bit of contracting lined up that I thought was going to
Mhm.
just carry me through until we found a job.
Okay.
But that didn't drop to zero, but it started to dry up also. So we had a rough few months. But even before that, we knew within a few months that this felt like home. Like this is where God wanted us to be. And we really see ourselves as missionaries here. I mean, we weren't sent by any official mission sending
Right.
organization.
You're not representing
Um,
a church or anything.
right, right. But really feel like God has placed us here for a
Right.
purpose. And I don't know exactly what that purpose is, but um it's probably been a couple years ago now that I was just really struggling with that. And I felt God say, just be here. And, so after Bible school, then I was working. So uh, I couldn't continue on with like the second year of Bible school, but my wife did the second year. Um,
That's good.
and our girls started going to school in Swedish, and people tell us they sound like natives. Uh,
Do you
but
speak Swedish?
very little. Um,
Your wife?
Yeah, some she can if she has to. She's a lot better at listening. Like she understands Swedish,
Okay.
but and she
But a lot
can.
of people speak English up there, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, yeah. They well, and especially with tech jobs, like
Yes.
when I was looking for programming jobs here, most of the well, some a few places wanted you to speak Swedish, but very few. Most of them in the job description, it lists fluent spoken and written English as one of the requirements. So it's like, check, got that
Check.
one.
It's auto. Yeah, and it's really interesting because like recent I recently I actually bumped into like a LinkedIn article where it was talking about how in certain nations like they were just going to switch to needing to know English because the
Yeah,
IDEs, all the software programming, um, is in English basically, in basic
yeah,
English. So English is still a predominant language that even if you don't speak it in your day to day, you have to know some of it because of the
yeah,
programming languages and the syntax.
yeah.
So it's really interesting.
Well, it's interesting. Erlang and Elixir actually use the like British spelling for some things. So like they
Mm.
have behaviors, but it's got like an extra letter in there. I'm like, wait,
Yeah, the
that's not how you
U,
spell big.
like
Yeah,
savior. There's a U.
yeah, yeah,
I would write it
exactly.
like that for many years.
Ah, um, but yeah, So found a job so that we could have the residence permit and the visa sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really, for a while was kind of wrestling with that because, coming through Bible school and kind of getting like a new, renewed vision for like missions and what ministry could look like. But just seeing that, me having the job and our family living here, and my wife actually works part-time at the church. She does video editing and content production
Oh, very nice.
as part of their media team. Um, and my oldest daughter, especially, is really involved with volunteering at the church. And so just seeing all four, I have two daughters. I don't know if I mentioned that, but seeing all four of us uh, involved with the church, mm, involved with the church and flourishing as a family has been amazing. So
That's really awesome when the family can be in harmony and serve God as one
yeah.
body. Um, like that's the case with excuse me, my eye.
Uh,
um, that is the case with like my family as well.
oh, nice.
My wife, and then we have a young family, so we have like 5-year-old soon to be 6 at the time of this recording, 3-year-old and a 1-year-old girl. So two
Nice.
boys, one girl, and my pastor is actually my father-in-law. So my
Oh,
my
wow.
wife is a
Okay.
preacher's daughter, and
Ah,
then we have my mother-in-law, and then she has two other kids. So she has like her middle son, and then their youngest son, which is like 9. He's like 9 years old. Um, so
mm, wow.
we all started a home church when
Oh,
I got
okay.
out of the
Okay.
military, and they started kind of like a feeler for it for a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and started
Yeah.
hosting like Bible studies and whatnot, and then sometimes have like sermons going on in the house. Fun fact, where I'm recording this is actually one used to be my brother-in-law's room. So
Ah.
this is a mobile home property that we own
Oh,
as a
wow. Okay.
family, which is also the home church. And it's just really awesome to see when like the family is in sync in the same spirit and have a desire and passion to serve God. And God just opens up doors in many different ways. Like what I am doing with Code Fellowship here is nothing of what my family is doing day to day. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do or ties in with what they do day to day. My father-in-law is a heavy duty mechanic for a construction company. My
Oh,
wife
wow.
works as a verification specialist for student loan FAFSA applications.
Ah.
My mother-in-law, she's our full-time babysitter basically. And then my brother-in-law, he's a electric guy. So
Oh,
he
yeah.
works with the local electric company, like working with transformers and stuff like that. So you see, very different function.
He like climbs up the poles and
No,
that
he's
type
not
of
a
thing, or
journeyman. No, he
ah,
just
okay.
deals with the hubs and stuff
Ah,
like that. So
okay.
here, like
Okay.
there's hubs that are sitting down the floor. Um, but yeah, like
Mm,
completely different function. And I've been blessed to be in a position that allows me to study the scripture more, to be more involved with you and everyone else that I've spoken to, right, on this podcast. And that's all by the grace of God and just his calling. I feel that that is no coincidence, no chance or luck. It's what God intended for my life, and that helps, be a light in a world of darkness, specifically in the tech industry, which I actually wanted to touch upon a little bit. I know that you're actually building up also a podcast
yeah.
called Faith and Code. There you go.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about that. How, with everything that you've been through, you have a vast knowledge of programming, have been through different facets of the industry, and looks like you've been a pioneer at various companies, which is super awesome to hear. But also went through adversities. How has all that led you to wanting to create your own podcast, audio podcast? I'm assuming you said, right?
Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
called Faith and Code, and what is that gonna look like? If you'd like to give us a little preview on that.
So, I mean, finding I first found podcasts back when we lived in California.
Mm.
And so, for a long time, the only shows that I listened to were just coding. Um, but, kind of started to branch out and, listen to, a variety of different shows. But always thought it would be a cool thing to do. So it's kind of been just one of those in the back of my mind, cool ideas. And then in Bible school, we were supposed to have a mission trip. We actually had plane tickets booked for Switzerland. We were going to go for 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe it was only two, on a trip to Switzerland. But that trip got canceled because of COVID,
Mm.
in 2020. And so we kind of went a different direction and like created different teams that were just going to try to do something, whatever we could do locally, or alternate of an alternate from going on a mission trip. So there was one group that actually did a little variety TV show, and that was a fun one. And then I was on a team where we were talking about starting a podcast. So actually came up with a name, Hope Tales, and which I still really like that name. But it never really went anywhere. Like we tried to record one show, but it was in person, and I didn't really have the right equipment to do that. And
Mm.
at least at the time, I hadn't heard about anything like Riverside or this format that makes it a lot easier to record shows. So I'd hung on to that idea for a few years now. Just every once in a while, I'd think about like, oh, I really should pick that up and run with doing that podcast. But then I've also thought about doing a tech show, talking about programming. But I never, so for a few years now, I've been kind of having this internal debate. Like, do I do another coding podcast? Or do I do something where I'm just talking to people about their testimonies? And then there was actually a guy who I follow, who in one of his email newsletters was like, tell me what you're working on now, or like what you're struggling with, or something like that, or like, what can I help you with doing? So it was one of those, I don't know if he was going to read it or if it would ever lead to anything, or if it was just something he was doing for his newsletter. But I started writing a reply, and I wasn't even being specific. I said, I've got these two niches that I don't know which one to pick. Like, and I don't really think that they cross over very much. Like, I'm struggling with making this decision. And so as I'm composing this email, it hits me, hey, I'm not the only person that lives in these two worlds of faith and code. And so it just kind of sprung out from there. And I actually reached out to a small handful of people, asking if they would be willing to be a guest. And David Neal, you might know him from the like hand-drawn avatars, and like his
Oh
artwork
yeah.
is out there, and he's
Is he a brother in Christ?
yeah, Reverend Geek
Oh, okay.
is
Yeah,
his
that
is his handle.
I always like associated reverent with like reverence, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
has to do with something faith based, but I guess I've never really put all of it together, and that's super awesome. I've heard of people say that he's super humble and
Oh yeah,
super
yeah.
kind and loving, and I'm like, okay, well, fruits of the spirits are showing
Yeah, definitely.
here.
Uh, and so I reached out to him, and he was the first person that responded with oh, that sounds like a wonderful idea, and he agreed to be my first guest. So I recorded with him, and then I was talking with my boss at work, which in
Mm,
one-on-ones with my boss, in pretty much every job I've had, is the one place where I've always been open about my
mm,
faith, even if I haven't always been in other contexts in one-on-ones. And I've been blessed to, even at some just regular secular companies, I've had Christian bosses a few different times. Um, my current boss, not a believer, but I told him about my podcast idea, and he said, "Oh, I know someone you should interview." And so it's a guy here in Sweden who's he's like a agile coach, and he's written a couple books, and he's part of the Salvation Army church.
Gotcha.
And so my boss, who's not a believer, recommended this guy, and he was my second guest. So I've recorded 2 shows. I haven't published yet, but I also spoke at the Elixir Conf EU last week, and so
Yeah,
I kind of took a little break from focusing on the podcast to like put some effort into my talk for the conference. But yeah, so that getting some initial like really positive responses, was a great way to just kind of kick it off. And I looked for other similar shows, and I found a few, and I don't know if this is going to sound too judgmental or not, but some other shows that I've found are too preachy. And I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I wanted it to be just real conversations with people about like, how is your faith affecting your work? And, it seems similar to the types of questions and things you're asking people. But actually, one of the things that Right Now put out was a book called Work as Worship. And they had this concept that, a lot of people have kind of this dichotomy between like your work is over here and worship is over here. But they're basically talking about how like everything we do is for the glory of God.
Yes.
And so, the wanting to encourage people to, well, I think just the nature of talking about like how many believers there are that are also developers is, just lifting that and making it more visible is going to bless a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
And just having those conversations around like, what does it mean to, like I said, do all that we do for the glory of God, and to be a person of faith in an industry that sometimes feels, very.
It's very secular.
Right. Yeah.
Very,
and then
very secular.
And then also here in Sweden is an interesting country because, I mean, Christianity has been here for over 1,000 years. And I mean, they have a cross on the flag, and, the almost all of their public holidays are Christian holidays, but people don't even know what they're celebrating. Like there's the Ascension Day or something like that. And there was a Swedish coworker who was talking about the day is coming up, and he was trying to translate it into English. He's like, yeah, I don't really know what this day is. It's like Flying Christ Day or something. And I thought that was kind of funny, like his perspective on like what this day was. But yeah, Sweden just being like a very secular place, and like, what does it mean to like we have something that, we have a faith and a belief that should make a difference in how we live and how we treat people, and there should be a result. And yeah, I'm just really, I mean, it's kind of the same reason I started that user group. It was, this is a user group that I want to participate in. So I had this, here's a podcast that I would really like to listen to, and I don't know if it exists, so I'm going to start one. So
yeah, same here.
But yeah, then I mean, discovering your show, I think it's affirming in the idea, like it's got legs, and it, it's definitely something that, it's an idea whose time has come, and when that happens, it doesn't only appear in one place. So I was encouraged by seeing your show, and I've listened to a few episodes now. I don't remember exactly which ones, but I picked it up and listened to a few, and it's always been really encouraging.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that it's been encouraging. And I try to do, I know what you mean about like the preachy type of thing as well. Like, because sometimes I can fall in that area, in that preachy mode. but it's because I have a passion of fire, right?
Right.
To give something that is placed in my heart. But one thing that I want to get better at is allowing, which probably will pretty relevant with this episode, is allowing the guests to speak more, give that testimony. There's gonna be that conversation, right? And like we
Yeah.
talked about off the recording, I see some things that could improve, but it's gonna take time.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you see legs, and that's good because we have a little bit of subscribers. I think now we're like close to 90 subscribers,
Oh, nice.
but
Nice.
that
Okay.
doesn't amount to probably the impact it has given to actual people.
Oh,
Um,
right. Yeah.
I have a Discord community that people can check out in the show notes and also in the video description on when they're watching on YouTube. And God has added the right people to the community.
Nice.
I'm sure
Yeah.
that everyone that comes across the podcast, maybe they don't use Discord, or maybe they don't want to use Discord. Maybe it's a distraction, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Because I believe that God will add the ones that are needed to be added, right? Whether it's subscribers only on the podcast channel and interacting in the comments, or connecting with me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or even Threads, to just having a select few on the Discord community. And what's super cool is that a lot of them they're indie hackers, or they have their own business where they're building tools to glorify God.
Yeah.
So it's super awesome what God is doing, and I feel honored to coexist with your podcast, and I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't want to take much of your time today either. Try to keep the podcast episodes to an hour. But I'm really inspired by your story.
Thanks.
And there's one thing that I really like of what you said in the onboarding process when we were like just chit chatting and whatnot. You mentioned a Bible passage in Joel. Would you elaborate a little bit more on that? If you want to read it to us, we
Yeah.
put it on screen and everything. And just what is it that God has placed in your heart when it comes to that, and what you're doing in your life as a career professional?
Yeah. So it's Joel 2, starting verse 25. So 25 through 27. I'll just read the whole thing.
Okay.
So it's God speaking. I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten, the great locust and the young locust, the other locusts, and the locust swarm, my great army that I sent among you. You will have plenty to eat until you are full, and you will praise the name of the Lord your God, who has worked wonders for you. Never again will my people be ashamed. Never again will my people be shamed. Then you will know that I am in Israel, that I am the Lord your God, and that there is no other. Never again will my people be shamed. And that
Amen.
that restoring the years that the locusts have eaten, that when I left that friend of mine and the Bible software project, and it felt like it was my mission and my career and my best friend, even though he was a jerk. And like coming out of that, and there were some things that I learned a lot from that, but it was the surviving that and getting through that. And there could be a lot of shame in some of the ways that he abused me and some of those things. And so just that passage of God's promises to restore what the enemy has stolen from us has shown true in my life. And more and more over the years, moving and meeting my wife and having kids, and reconnecting with various different, or connecting with different ministries. And I think just launching this podcast will just be yet another step in the God fulfilling his vision, even though sometimes we think like, oh, I missed it, or there was my one chance and and that didn't work out. But our God is a God of second chances, and He brings things back, and He rescues us. And I mean, one of the things that I didn't really touch on today, but He's taught me how to forgive.
Amen.
Like this man who abused me. There have been a couple different times where I've had to, just make the decision that I would forgive. And I mean, one thing that, well, it was when I was still living in Denver. Um, my One of my roommates had a PlayStation, and we were, I don't even remember what game it was, but there were a few different like first person shooter games. And I had to stop playing those because I started having nightmares that I was shooting this guy who
Oh,
had mistreated me. And that was when it really kind of hit me like, oh, there's something here that I need some supernatural help
yes.
to get through. And so getting to the point where I could say, God, I'm glad you're the judge and I don't have to be. And when I could finally say, like, I hope to see him in heaven someday, because I have no idea how that's going to work, but somehow, uh, if he's there, which, like I said, I've forgiven, and I hope he got right with God.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's actually passed away. That's another part of the
Oh,
story that
oh
we didn't
wow.
have time to get into. And when I
Yeah.
when I heard that, I actually cried, which really surprised me. Like, that it was. I mean, I never really wanted to see him again on Earth, but I'd always had this, just like, oh, someday we'll be able to talk about the good things that happened and the people that
Yes.
we touched. We'll know in heaven the people that were touched by the Bible software that we created. And when I got to that point, and then just having that, without God's help, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that it would be possible to forgive. Like that.
Yeah.
That would just be that would
That's
just be tough.
that's a really good reminder for anyone, uh, it, and even for ourselves, right? Because we go
Yeah.
day to day through treacherous waters. So
Yeah.
people, they're always going to persecute you or harm you because of your faith, because of where you stand. Um, but Jesus not only tells Peter to forgive, 70 times 7, like
Yeah.
he tells us and exhorts us to love our enemies
Oh,
and
right.
to
Yeah.
feed them and to care for them, because it and it's like that phrase that I grew up with. It's like that your closest friends, right, are also your closest enemies, or
Oh,
your closest enemies are your best friends. Why? Because I now looking at it from a Christ-centered lens, it makes sense. Those are the
hmm.
people that you may have a lot of friction with, but
Yeah.
God has a purpose for them in your life
Oh, right. Yeah.
in some way, shape, or form. Just the way that God has used the enemies of his people to draw them near to him
Right.
multiple
Yeah.
times, because they're stubborn. Because I mean, till this day, they are, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and what's going on around us right now is not only just prophecy, but it's a testament of how God yet is sovereign, and he's faithful, and he's loving, and he wants his people to be saved and
Yeah.
join all those in which salvation was brought to from. So thank you for reminding us of, the importance of forgiveness. It really brings
You're
healing,
welcome.
and
Yeah.
it releases our hearts from all that darkness, which is bitterness,
Yeah.
misery. Like, because why dwell in that? Right?
Right. Yeah.
When the love of Christ conquers all things, right? As the scripture says. So it's super awesome to have you. Thank you so much, Dennis, for being on the show. Um, let's get into the passing of the bread
Okay.
segment. So it's a breadcrumb, right? You can leave a
Yeah.
breadcrumb if it's a shameless plug or something that you've read or wanted to share with people. Feel free to do so, or hold your peace.
Yeah. So I just finished the audiobook. I think it's the fastest I've read a book ever. I mean, it was the audiobook, but it like I put
Listen.
all the podcasts I've listened to
Yeah.
had to go on hold for about a week because it was this
Wow.
book called "The Book That Made Your World," and I don't have the author's name in front of me, but it's written by
Fine.
actually an Indian guy.
Okay.
Um, and so he tells some of his testimony in that. But it's basically the biblical foundations of Western civilization. And part of
Vishal
what,
Mangalwadi.
yeah, ish, yeah, yeah, I don't know how
How
to
the
pronounce
Bible
it.
created the soul of Western civilization.
Yeah. I've seen a similar book before that I didn't really agree with everything it said, so I never really
Mm.
recommended. But this book was amazing. And he actually had some really good things to say about like science and technology and like showing how, um, in India and China and in the Middle East, they had discoveries like some of the things in the Middle East, like they had math and they had figured some things out. They were smart people, but their belief system prevented them from really developing science the way we have in the West,
Mm.
under the biblical worldview. And so, like, one of the things he was talking about was just literacy and language and printing, and where the Hindu belief system is that like our material world and our thoughts are like what we're trying to get rid of. So like they're like nothingness and like cleansing your mind and don't think about anything. So they don't actually
Mm.
read their scriptures. They just like chant or have like mantras or whatever. Whereas um Christianity and the Bible, it's all about reading the word, and that we have a physical world. It's not that the spiritual world is real and like what we experience in the physical world is kind of the imaginary
Useless.
fake
Right.
world, is kind of
Right.
the Hindu view.
Mm.
But Christianity believes, yeah, and the Bible teaches that the physical world is real, and our minds can comprehend it and understand it. And like he talked about how that led to the advancements in technology, and then also some things like like caring for the poor,
Mm-hmm.
where in the caste, he contrasted like the caste system in India, where the like the religious people, like it was against their religion to help people in lower castes. Like, oh no, those people are where they are because that was their
Interesting.
karma, like that's where they're supposed to be. Whereas Christianity and the biblical worldview values all people, and you know because God sent his son to the earth to save us, that means we're all worthy. And so yeah, it was a great book. Like I don't know, I think everyone should read it or listen to
Yeah.
it. It
Yeah.
was
Check
it
it out.
I got it on Audible. The friend who recommended it to me had some other audiobook platform that he was recommending, but
Mm.
um yeah, I thought that was a great book, and I'm probably not doing justice to what he said about technology, but it felt like we sometimes buy into this myth of like science and the Bible are in opposition, are fighting against each other. But he really drew the lines into where like modern scientific, like the scientific method wouldn't be possible if you didn't have the worldview of the Bible that teaches that there is an order to things, that there's God's law, and God set things into motion to follow physical
Certain
laws.
pattern.
Like
Right.
even the physical universe follows God's law. And
Mm-hmm.
so the concept that there's laws that we can discover and learn about and study is from the Bible. Like,
Right.
and the other worldviews don't have that. So yeah, breaking all of that down was fascinating. I think I'm going to actually listen to it again. It was
Yeah.
it was that
I'll
good.
have to
So
check it out. I do see, yeah, that um he is a Christian philosopher, right, from
yeah,
India, and social reformer, political columnist, and stuff like that. So he's very well ingrained into, the just kind of the the social
yeah.
problems and structures of his country. Um, I was actually talking about India. I was actually watching a documentary from Radical, which is a organization that's founded by David Platt. I'm not a proponent
Mm.
of David Platt by any means, but I bumped into um, just the documentary series that they have called
Uh,
Neighbors and Nations, or Neighborhoods and Nations,
mm.
and they
Okay.
talk about the hard to reach places. And the one that I finished watching today was specifically about Christianity in India, and
Oh,
how
nice.
it all started, and how there's a specific state in India that basically the simplicity of rice, a handful of rice, actually helped pave way to missionary work to
Mm.
India. And he talked about like that persecution of how what they have to go through in India,
Yeah.
and how India's social structure at some point they wanted to go into secularism, which basically is kind of like America, right? Allows
Yeah.
the aspect of choosing your own religion and stuff like that. Um, based practicing free will in its intentional form, but then when like you have another certain power comes into play, then they start to like, get rid of all these things that other thought leaders in their country put into place. And that's why, like, the current guy who is currently leading the nation in India, he wants to take the country to that again, to secularism, so that people have the freedom to choose what they believe in and practice, or how they want to live their
Mm.
life. But the problem is that not many care for that school of
Yeah.
thought, or that position. So there's a lot of opposition. So it's really cool. So I think it might go hand in hand with the
Yeah.
book. I have to check that book out
Yeah.
because I really like,
Yeah. It sounds like it.
um, yeah, I really like just how Christianity makes an impact
Yeah.
on things that now we have and take advantage of, from like scientific studies all the way down to like, coding. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I really want to come across with Good Fellowship, is letting people know that even that are non-believers or agnostic, right? They believe in something, but just not the right God. And then or just like believers themselves, is to come to an understanding that coding is very, very close to how God has created us to be, right?
Yeah.
Everything, like you said, everything has structure, everything has order. And like in coding, we have like, the order of separation, I believe is the right term, right? Separation of concern,
Oh.
right?
Oh. Yeah.
Then we have like the different hierarchies, right? Like CSS, like what CSS class is gonna, be more prominent and show you
Yeah.
its styling compared to where you put it. And that's exactly how God created us, right? But He created us without abstractions. Humans
Mm.
create a language, and we put abstraction onto abstraction, because either we try to make the easiest thing more complex, or we just take the more complex thing and try to make it easy, but with more complexity.
Yeah.
But we have a great God, and a God who understands us from the most deepest part of our hearts. And
Yeah.
he doesn't transform us from the outside in, he transforms us from the inside out. Because
Yeah.
why transform someone from the outside when the inside doesn't necessarily speak of good things? It has to be
Yeah.
the inside that gets transformed, so that way the
Oh.
outside is a living
Yeah.
testimony.
Yeah. Oh, so he was talking about, I think it was actually in the appendix, but it was one of
Mm,
the last parts of the book. He was talking about DNA is information.
yes.
And so, if you have, if you had two chicken eggs, they would look exactly the same. Uh, if they're not, not hard boiled or not rotten,
Right.
you would have no way of telling by looking at them which one will hatch into a chicken and which one will stay an egg. And the difference is this one has been fertilized. It's got extra information. It's got extra DNA in it that enables it to become a chicken and carry on life. And so he correlated that with the word of God is information. And basically talked about like how we take on the life of God is by accepting his word. And yeah, like we receive the life of God through the word of God, and like taking on, yeah, that he does such a better job in the book than I can retell it. But
Well,
yeah, that
we
was
will
one of
leave a
those like,
link
wow,
in
that's
the,
fascinating.
yeah, we'll definitely leave a link in the show notes and the video description. But
Cool.
I think that's the end of the episode, guys.
All
I
right.
know that we can be going for a very long time. I always enjoy these conversations. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Another episode of Code Fellowship. All the links will be down in the show notes. And if you have not subscribed, make sure you do so you'll be notified when a new episode goes live. You can also follow us on the other podcasting platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy, guys, and God bless.